Welcome to another episode of Tank Talks, your personal think tank for all things startups and venture capital. I'm your host, Matt Cohen, founder and managing partner at Ripple Ventures. On this week's episode, we welcome co-founder and CEO of Plooto, Abbasi, to discuss how being an immigrant makes you a better founder. Hamid shares his family's journey from Iran and the setbacks they faced trying to make their way over to Canada, and how he eventually started a new life in his early teens in a new land. Hamid also explains how he eventually made his way from the traditional retail banking world into the tech startup space with his first gaming startup, which eventually exited, and the lessons he learned from that experience. Lastly, we dig into Hamid's current startup Plooto and how his relentless pursuit for success helped him pivot the business early on and eventually led it to a growing FinTech platform for Canadian businesses. Now let's jump into the tank for this week's episode with Hamid Abbasi from Plooto. Thanks for joining us in the tank today, Hamid.
Thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
You know, Hamid, you've been building in the startup ecosystem for some time now, but you originally started your career in the banking industry working at Bank of Montreal on the personal and commercial banking side. But, you know, before we jump into that, I would really love it if you could share with our audience your incredible journey leaving Iran as a teenager and making your way over to Canada and how that shaped you as a young adult and eventually a future entrepreneur.
A lot of people think I was born in Canada because, I worked very hard on my accent when I came to Canada, just really trying to speak English as well as I could. But I was actually born in Iran and we moved to Canada when I was 14 years old with my mom and my dad was here and he sponsored us and we came to Canada a couple of years after he landed. But before we got to Canada, my dad always had this dream of obviously leaving Iran because Iran is as a theocracy, didn't really align with what his views were and what he wanted to do in life. So he always wanted to leave Iran to find a better life for himself and for his family. So he always tried ever since I was maybe 7 or 8 years old. Every year he would from Iran, he would go to Turkey and then he would try to make it to Greece or Germany or some other country. And every year they would, arrest him, send them back and he would do that. When I was 8 years old, he finally saved enough money, brought my mom and my dad my mom and myself to Turkey, and we paid some smugglers to actually help us get into Greece. So for a week, we basically just walked from 9-10 p.m. at night because you just have to do it, so people don't see you. And we just walked through all these farms and all these borders for close to 10 days. We walked and we would just stop during the day to eat some of the food that we had brought with ourselves, and finally made it into Greece. And obviously passing through the borders, you can imagine having to hide from border guards and, we had to swim through this river. And that was really scary because I was 8 years old and I wasn't a good swimmer. So I had to hang on to this smuggler's back as he was roping all the way to the other side of the river. And we got to Greece, got to this border town called Alexandropolis. And we got into the bus to go to Athens. But then as soon as we got on the bus, we got arrested. They put us in jail for a week. They were nice enough to put my dad and my mom and myself in a separate cell. But everybody else was in their own cell. And then after a week, after our information was processed, they put us on a bus. They brought us back to Turkey. And then they said, keep walking. So my mom and I came back to Iran, but my dad went back twice more, finally made it to Germany, worked there, paid smugglers. And in 98, he was able to get the necessary paperwork to be able to come to Canada and seek asylum. And then 2 years later, we came in.
I mean, what an unbelievable journey. I mean, I can't believe I have never heard that story, even meeting you in person so many times. It's so inspiring. It's so emotional. It pulls on so many different threads. I mean, the fact that you were smuggled through Turkey and walked for over a week. I mean, a lot of kids in North America can barely walk to the bus stop, let alone walking through a country for over a week. I mean, most just take an Uber or a scooter. I mean, but that experience of also being turned down and then have to try again. And then your dad obviously being so driven to want to get a better life for the family is just so inspiring. I mean, can you tell us a bit about the experience and how that sort of impacted you as a young adult when you eventually got to Canada? And obviously, your English is pretty perfect now. So you obviously worked very hard at that. But what other things did you have to work towards? And what were you inspired by when you eventually got to Canada?
It really gives you a drive, right? Because you really see this as an opportunity that you can't miss, because you can see that there's been so many sacrifices that have been made for you to be able to come to this country. I see very similar stories all the time in the news about migrants from South America or Mexico trying to get into the U.S. and those kids being processed at the border and the stuff that was happening with Trump. Like I could really empathize with that, because it's literally the experience that we went through to get to a better country, and we've been one of the very few lucky ones that were able to get to Canada, because most people don't, right? Like think about the money that you need to save to be able to pay somebody, and smugglers are not decent people, right? So a lot of time you lose your money, and they don't actually deliver. So there's been a lot of sacrifice that has been made for me to get here. So when I came to Canada, I wanted to succeed as much as possible by doing anything that I can. So it just gives me a drive that I kind of don't see everywhere else. And that's an unfortunate thing. Like, I feel like you don't need to go through the experience that I've had to build that drive. And a lot of people don't. And that's awesome. But I think you have one life to live, and time in your life is so precious. And it's gone before you even realize it. So why not live the best life that you can have? And that's really like how I think about life every day. So it's changed my perspective. Obviously, it's not all like fun and rosy, just like having to drive every day. But that's how I think about it.
I think it's actually the right way to think about it. I mean, pain and suffering without kind of punishment or death is really a great way to build a strong foundation for anyone who wants to survive in this world. I mean, you're right. We see it every day on the news of kids who are unfortunately, not able to have the luck that you had. But the ones that do make it here often are the ones who are the most successful. I mean, just look at the top tech CEOs of today and the world leaders of today in sort of entrepreneurship. They're all immigrants. Dara Khosrowshahi from Uber, even Jeff Bezos, CEOs of Microsoft, Satya Nadella, and, CEOs of Google, and all the leaders they're immigrants. And so it's not uncommon to have the ones who do get through and be lucky to have the drive that you have as well. But you took that, that luck, and you really ran with it, and you ended up getting into the banking world and eventually made your way over to the dark side, as we say, as a startup founder. So can you tell us a bit about that journey later on in your young adult life as you made your way from banking into the startup world and how you got your first start?
As I mentioned, that drive and that fire was really a big part of wanting to better my life. And obviously, like, if you were to put my life into some sort of algorithm or AI, it would not, generate CEO of a FinTech company, right? Like, it wouldn't work. So I had to work really, really hard to prove the algorithm wrong for that. Really, the journey that I had is obviously, like, as we mentioned, I went to, I wanted to get into banking. Then when I got to Bank of Montreal, I just really realized that I just hated my life at the bank. And it's not a bank. This is not a dig to Bank of Montreal. They actually helped us in the early days of Plooto a lot. It's just living in the banking world was just not what I wanted to do. But one thing that it exposed me was to the lives of small businesses, because I was in personal commercial banking, so I dealt with a lot of small businesses. And then I also had a stint at the branch for 6 months, because I just really wanted to understand the operations of the bank. And I really realized how difficult the lives of small businesses are. I thought that somebody at the bank would solve this problem for them. So I left the bank in 2010 to start a gaming company, because I've been a gamer all my life, and I really wanted to get into tech, but I didn't want to leave Toronto. I really love Toronto. Yeah, and the only, believe it or not, people think, Toronto right now being one of the main tech hubs in North America has always been like that. But in 2010, there were like two VCs in town, and there was like no other tech companies other than gaming companies. Gaming companies were really prevalent. So I started to, Sergey and I, who's my co-founder in Plooto, we started a gaming company. We had this side hustle of making games while we both had full-time jobs. And one of the games that we had invested a little bit of our own money ended up actually making over $1 million in revenue within a few months. So it just gave us the opportunity to quit our jobs and get into building a gaming company. So it was just like I was just pursuing my dream. I never ever thought that I would ever be able to like build a business, but the determination was there, and the gaming business did well, and we got acquired. And
It's interesting to hear you say how there was no one around investing in early stage technology companies. And the only ones that were a couple of venture funds that we know of that were in the mobile app or gaming space. And I remember vividly when we were starting Turnstile meeting with, Amit Shah at Zynga's offices when he was writing angel checks over at like Church and Richmond or something. And it's true, like the ecosystem would only support what the ecosystem wanted to support, which was in mobile apps or gaming companies. It's very funny how that sort of like flywheel really doesn't actually happen until more people start to contribute to it, right?
totally, totally. I think everything in history repeats itself. So if you look at the history of Silicon Valley, it's very similar as well, right? Like Atari was really the first big company. Other than the semiconductor businesses, I think the more like a consumer focused business. Atari and the gaming community was like the big first community of hobbyists that then turned, like Steve Jobs used to work at Atari. So it was a very similar story of hobbyists building games leading into solving problems leading to businesses, and then obviously venture capitalists come after that, right? So speaking of Amit is now a partner at Golden Ventures, and Golden Ventures was one of the only seed stage like funds back in like 2010. And I pitched him. He declined for a good reason, but he actually ended up investing in Plooto after that.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, if you weren't building in semiconductors or, gene sequencing like Genentech, what else was there to really invest in the first iteration of Silicon Valley until there was an Atari that people could be like, oh yeah, I understand like, gaming. That makes more sense than like gene sequencing. I'll leave that for another episode. So as you mentioned, you sold your first gaming studio after 5 years to a TSX listed company. Congrats on that. What was that like as an early entrepreneur? And eventually, you got your start, with your second startup in Plooto. How did you make the transition after selling that company?
It's a surreal experience, right? When we started Vast, we really didn't have any investors because, we were a very high risk gaming company that's based on content, and content, as Netflix can tell you, it's a very risky business, and you need those hits on a continuous basis. So because of that, we bootstrapped our entire operations until we got acquired. We didn't raise any outside funding. And when we were acquired, it was really a surreal experience because it was the first time where idea can be tangible, that you can say, hey, I'm going to start this, and somebody's willing to pay money for this idea. So it just gave us really the confidence to be able to say that we had to do all of this hard work on our own, and we didn't raise any capital, but we were able to build a business that somebody found interesting, and we got acquired. Sergey and I, so my co-founder and I, we had to spend a year with the parent company. Because once you get acquired, they call it the golden handcuffs, right? You got to spend some time with the parent company. But I didn't really agree with where the parent company wanted to take our gaming company and the direction that they wanted to take after they acquired us. So we started to think about like ideas that we wanted to pursue. And when I was running the finance operations at the Vast, I would spend pretty much like most of my weekends trying to pay different vendors and trying to reconcile our books and close our books and understand who needs to be paid. And during the week, I would have to go to the bank and send wire transfers and sign all of these checks. And that's not why I started a gaming company, right? Like I started a gaming company because I just loved games and I wanted to like build games that other people enjoyed. But then I had to end up doing all of these things that I didn't really enjoy. And when I talk to other entrepreneurs, they all said the same thing: is that the moment their companies become, they get a little bit of traction, they now have to deal with all of these extra things. That is necessary for you to survive as a business because you need that revenue coming in and you need to keep your suppliers happy. But they had to take care of it. So we knew that there was something here, and we started Plooto to solve that problem, but we didn't know how big of a problem it was. So it took us like 3.5 years to really figure it out, but that was like the original idea to solve a pain that we had when we were running our first company.
That's interesting. So that happens a lot these days. You see a lot of people, obviously, like Asana was started that way, when Dustin Moskovitz was trying to do project management within Facebook, obviously at a much bigger scale, but he saw how big of a problem it was and he decided to spin it out as its own startup. And, obviously the success with that, but we see that time and time again. But I remember you started as a blockchain company, I believe, using the Bitcoin payment rails, correct?
Yeah, exactly. For the first 6 months, we were a Bitcoin company. We quickly had to pivot from that because our customers, like, I always wanted to solve this problem for small businesses, and small businesses had no idea what the hell a Bitcoin or a blockchain or anything was. We realized very quickly that it's going to require like 10 years of education before blockchain and Bitcoin becomes the norm. And we wanted to solve an immediate problem. And the feedback we got from all of our customers was, I love the features you've built, but I don't know what the hell this blockchain Bitcoin thing is. Can you just make it work with my bank? And so that was like the first like pivot that we made. But from that early on days, we learned a really important lesson, which was you need to build your product for your customers. It's not about how you want to solve the problem. It's really about the problem that your customers find valuable, that they're willing to pay for it. Because if you, sometimes a lot of entrepreneurs fall in love with the solution and they don't really care about like if anyone's going to buy this. But we very quickly learned that customers were not willing to pay for a blockchain payment automation solution. They wanted it to work for their bank.
Yeah, we hear this all the time. And it's like you got to slow down to speed up, and you got to actually wait for the pull of the market to actually know when you're actually hitting the right chord to build something customers want today. Unfortunately, a lot of the crypto craze we've seen over the last few years was people building solutions for a problem that didn't really exist. And so therefore, we've seen obviously the dismantling of a lot of these, solutions out there, getting back to the basics. But had you raised money already for the Bitcoin payment rail business, or had you not yet?
So we were very lucky to be able to fund the company for the first like year using some of the resources that we had gotten from selling our first company. So we didn't have to raise money immediately. However, once we made that pivot from blockchain to existing payment rails, we raised our first round of funding, which is around 500K from Real Ventures, but we didn't have that many customers. It was a deck. It was just a proof of concept. They probably gave us that funding because we had built the company on our own and exited from the company on our own. So I think that credibility probably had a lot to do with why they gave us that money than the actual results that we had produced. Which is why I'm saying it took us another 3.5 years from that point to actually be able to like build a company that that product market fit. We were able to raise pretty quickly. We were lucky enough and fortunate enough to have that ground and that track record. So Real Ventures came in as our first institutional investor.
But remember, you were also in the finance space, in the banking space prior to the gaming company. So you also had that experience going for you. But, I'm a user of Plooto at our firm, Ripple. We love it. It's been a great product for us to use. So I understand the pain points that you're solving. But maybe for our audience who doesn't understand what Plooto is solving, can you explain, like, first off, how broken the financial services industry is and how shitty it is to send payments across these old rails and how old these like 10,000 pound gorillas really are in terms of moving money around the ecosystem?
Yeah, I think A lot of people do not realize that our entire payment rails were built in 60s and 70s, and they haven't been updated since then. If you think about wire transfers, for example, wire transfers are something that was built back in 70s for large banks to transfer between each other. It was never meant to be used as a consumer product, and it hasn't been updated since then much, which is why in Canada we still don't have real time settlement, right? Like if I send you a payment, you have to wait 3 to 5 days to ensure that it clears. That's because banks have to literally go and talk to each other and say, "Hey, is this check valid? Like, does your client have this money?" And then they're like, "Yes, it does." And there's a manual transfer that happens, and then that's how you get your money. The crux of it is that we are really outdated infrastructure that makes it really hard for simple things to happen, but such as sending a payment, receiving a payment, reconciling that payment. However, that's not really the problem that Plooto is really trying to solve. I believe that's a component of the problem that we're trying to solve. But the problem that we're trying to solve is the problem is what keeps entrepreneurs up at night. If you look at the statistics, very few small businesses survive. In fact, 70% of small businesses disappear within 10 years. So very small number of businesses get to be around longer than 10 years. And the number one reason that these businesses fail is due to poor management of cash flow. If you remember from my earlier story, I told you entrepreneurs don't start businesses because we want to manage financial operations and payment operations, right? Like we want to solve a problem. We want to talk to customers and sell more. That's what we want to do. However, because entrepreneurs don't manage that part of their business correctly, a lot of businesses fail due to poor management of cash flow. So the problem that Plooto is trying to solve is that cash flow management problem that all small businesses have, but they cannot afford a solution because typically cash management solutions cost a lot of money because they're very sophisticated products and it costs millions of dollars to develop, and SMBs can't afford it. So what Plooto does is we offer our customers platform that helps them manage accounts payable and accounts receivable and automate that entire process for a fee that they can afford, which is around $30 a month, plus some small transactions. And our hope in the future is that we build our product to a point where you can streamline and automate your entire cash management in the future on Plooto without having to use any other platform.
Yeah, it's so funny when I heard you describe like how broken the system is with like, the fact that we don't have real-time settlements. I always think about the movie Catch Me If You Can and how Leonardo DiCaprio, who's playing this guy, Frank Abagnale, is outrunning the banks because they can't catch up with the clearance of his checks that take like 7 to 10 days to clear. So he just keeps cashing in checks, taking the money out. And by the time they realize that the check hasn't cleared, he's already gone on to the next city and the next bank.
Believe it or not, that system is still in place and it's clearing your checks today.
Wild, just wild. Well, there are people obviously trying to solve this. There have been for years. So what made you think that you could win in this crowded market as a first-time FinTech founder?
You use the example of Asana as a product, and I thought it's very interesting that you brought that up because entrepreneurs, first of all, there's something wrong with entrepreneurs, right? Like our brains don't work like regular people. And the reason for that is because we see the opportunity way more than the risk. We really see that this opportunity, the opportunity to solve this problem could be a really, really big problem. But we don't also realize that, there's 150 years of banking history and all of these layers and all of these layers and acquisitions, and how are you going to unbundle all of these and create a solution that works? So to be honest, when we got into this space, maybe there was a bit of naivete in terms of like how we looked at the problem, because we're like, of course we can solve it. Why not? We're smart. We're technologists. We can solve this problem. However, then you realize how complex this problem is and how many different angles are involved, whether it's talking to regulators or banks or government, fraud. There's so many different aspects. And then you realize why this hasn't been solved so far. But then as an entrepreneur, we want to solve problems. So we get excited about these problems and we look at them as challenges, which is what keeps us striving towards wanting to solve this problem. But to answer your question in terms of why we believe that we can solve this problem, it's because we've lived this problem, right? Many of the people who are building payment technologies at some of the large financial institutions have never run a business. They've never struggled with managing their cash on a day-to-day basis. We've lived this every single day. We know what it feels like when you are only one pay cycle away from being bankrupt. So we understand the pain, and we use that pain to really build products that are better and really innovate on behalf of our customers, because our customers, they're just so busy with just trying to keep their head above the water. So they rely on us to solve that problem. So to answer your question, we just believe that we can solve that problem better than everybody else because we've lived this, and we woke up every day and think about this, and we went to bed every day thinking about this.
Yeah, it's a bit of that like internal optimist meets like naivete and the brute force of not taking no for an answer.
I love that. Brute force. Yeah. So much of life is about, brute force in that.
I mean, your dad going back time and time again to the smugglers is exactly the idea of what I think real brute force is. But I remember using the product early on. There wasn't a SaaS fee, as you mentioned, the like $25, $30 SaaS fee, which was great. It was a transaction fee-based model. But you realize that, because the GMB models are hard to predict, and it's hard to obviously build a business around that, you had to implement a SaaS fee. And a lot of companies are struggling with that, especially in the GMV type model. And they also are worried that increasing pricing on a product could churn customers. So can you tell us about how you gauge the right time, the right price to make sure that this was going to work for your business in the long run?
Raising prices is one of the scariest things that you typically go through as a founder or as a CEO, because you really you can run tests all day, but there's no way that you're going to know that this sample cohort is going to be the correct representative of the broader customer base that you. So for us, we took that really, really seriously. As I mentioned, when we started the company in 2015, it really took us until like beginning of 2019 to realize why customers were using it. And when we realized that our customers come to us to help them streamline their to streamline their lives, we knew that payments was really great, but there's a whole automation component that our customers are asking from us to do. So when we realized that, we knew that in order for us to deliver that experience to our customers, we needed the resources to be able to go and build those features and products that customers are asking for. So we tested this for 6 months. We had really frank conversations with our customers, and we told them, listen, we're a venture-backed business, and we don't have the resources to be able to go and build what you have asked us. If you believe in where we are going, then we want you to support us so we can have the resources to be able to build the technologies that you've asked from us to build. And we had a really frank conversation with our customer. We flipped the switch after testing it for 6 months, and 82% of customers actually stuck around out of our entire customer base. So they believed in our mission, and they believed in what we were building, and that resonated with them. And I think that was like one of the key critical moments, because if that had not gone right, then Plooto would not be around today. Because we would have we're a venture-backed company, right? We would have run out of capital and we would have had to shut down. But that gave us that lifeline, the very last lifeline, to be able to continue building and not shutting our doors.
Yeah, it's amazing because you gauged it first. You understood, how vital the platform was, and if it didn't turn on the next day, how many of your customers would have been shit out of luck. So kudos to you for doing that research ahead of time before flipping the switch. But I got to ask: is there anything you wish you would have done differently or changed about the strategy looking back now, even though it's been successful, obviously? Would you have done it sooner? Would you have tried to think about different tiers of it? Would you have thought about just different things that like doesn't matter now because it's all water under the bridge? But if you had to do it again, would you have done it faster? Would you have done it right away? Like what kind of things would you have done differently, if any?
Hindsight is 2020 always, right? So it's very difficult to say what we could have done differently because, as I mentioned, 82% of our customers stuck around because they really loved using the product. So I wouldn't say that I would have done it sooner because then that means the product maybe wasn't ready or it didn't have the features that customers love or the workflows that we had built for them that would justify the subscription fee. Because as you mentioned, many companies fail in doing that, right?
Of course, but a lot of immigrant parents would have said to you, what happened to the other 18%?
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right.
I can only imagine you telling your mom and dad that you saved 82% of the customers when you implemented this and how heroic of an achievement that would have been. And they would have said, what happened to the other 18%? I just know it. I just know
100%,
it.
100%. No,
It worked, though. It worked.
And so many of entrepreneurs, like, again, forget about this, that we have this saying in Plooto, we say, in God we trust, but everybody else must bring data. When we introduce our subscription pricing, there's a lot of unhappy customers, right? That's absolutely true. But if we only went with, that 18% who was very vocal about the change that we have made, then we would have never made that change. But sometimes as an entrepreneur, you got to make those tough calls for everybody. And then the market reacts to that. And then, because you can't tell the future, all you can do is to react to how the market is doing. But we pay a lot of attention. I mean, we tested like our pricing models like for 6 months. We ran it to different cohorts. We have like onboarding flows built on different prices. So we ran all the numbers, but then at the end of the day, we just had to make a decision, right? Because I mean, you can look at data. You want your decision to be based on data, but then there's a certain point where you just have to pull the plug and just like make it happen. And that's what we did. So we're really grateful that our customers really supported us and they continue to support us because if that gave us the opportunity to build all the new things that we're building. And for example, we just released Plooto Capture where it allows you to just like take a picture of your invoices and we automatically like upload that. We've introduced more sophisticated approvals. Like all of that came from the fact that customers said, yes, I want you to go in this direction. And we had the data to back it up.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Everyone says as a founder, the cheapest cost of capital is your own customers' revenue. So if you can get more of that without having to go raise venture capital or debt or something, you're going to want to try that first. And it obviously worked for you.
And it's so true because like I talk to like so many entrepreneurs and they have this obsession with raising capital. If they're not raising capital, then they don't consider themselves successful, right? And there was a very long period. I mean, like people look at our most recent Series B that we raised. We raised 20 million USD Series B. And everybody's like, wow, this is amazing. This is where I want to be. People don't see the 7 years prior to that. Like we didn't raise that much, right? Like, I mean, 80% of the capital we've raised has come in the past 2 years. Capital is not like what you want to pursue. And I try to like say that to so many young entrepreneurs that don't pursue venture capital. If you can avoid investors, please do that. I mean, my dream is like to be able to build a massive company with no investors. It's tough to do it in fintech. It's kind of next to impossible to do it in fintech. But that is the dream because people think, oh, investors, capital, it's going to be so easy. But everything in life is yin and yang, right? Like every positive has an equal negative reaction to it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're living in this world right now where, you may have had a $2 billion valuation on your last round, but you've raised $400 million to get there and you only have 10 or 20 million to show for it in revenue. Well, guess what? Your company just went from 2 billion in revenue or valuation to 400 million overnight because that's what your pref stack is. And that's what the capital injected into the business is. So there's a lot of things, you're right, from a positive and negative reaction when raising capital. But, tell us about that process. I mean, you obviously have been successful in the last few years at raising capital. What tactics, did you apply to making sure you were successful? And how difficult was that journey for you at Plooto?
I'm not going to lie, the first like 4 or 5 years were very difficult to raise capital. We were very lucky at like within the first year of Plooto, we were able to like raise couple of $1 million to build. But then, from year one to year four and a half, we couldn't raise any capital, right? It was just more of very small extensions, which really led us to why having to really pivot in 2019 to be able to just like survive as a business. The past 2 years, obviously, we've been able to raise a lot more capital, but that is the outlier. That's not the norm. One of the key things that I think you need to realize, and I think this is one of the most important lessons that I've learned as an entrepreneur, is that you have to cater your message to each of the audience that you speak to. Like you cannot speak to your team the way you speak to investors. You can't really speak to customers the way you talk to your investors. So for us, why we've been successful the past like 2.5 years to raise the capital that we've been able to raise is the fact that I personally obviously had to go through my own growth journey to understand how to cater that message. But we obviously have built a business that is a really solid business with really solid fundamentals, because at the end of the day, you can have the best story, but if your metrics are not there, no one cares. So number one, you need to focus on your business and really build a solid business. You got to really build a solid team that can build that business for you. And then you have to be able to understand what it is that investors want from you and be able to cater that message to the investor. Investing raising capital is kind of like dating, right? Like you're not going to be able to go on every date that you go to and find a partner out of every date that you have, right? You need to go through a lot of dates until you find somebody that you click. And that is very similar to raising capital. So when you go to raise capital, you need to make sure that you're presentable, right? Like you need to make sure that you have your story together, you have your data room together, you have your deck together, you have your metrics all together. And that becomes really, to be honest, a numbers game. You got to be out there, you got to meet with everybody, you got to tell your story over and over and over. And then along the way, you gotta alter your story and fine tune it until you have a set of investors who really believe in that story and believe in you and believe in your vision and your team. And those are the ones that you really focus on. And then out of that, hopefully you get a few term sheets and then you go from there. Obviously, I am simplifying a very complex 6 month long with like 6 or 7 full-time, people involved in it all day, every day. But that's the gist of it.
No, it's true. You got to learn how to read the room, have strong IQ, but also EQ when it comes to fundraising, and also make sure you're dedicating 100% of your time to it, because it's like, you're right. If you're going to go into a date looking for a partner and you only have like 1 foot in the door and 1 foot, looking to find out what the next date is offering, you're never going to be successful. And so it's very true. You got to put 100% of your effort to it if you're going to go after like a traditional Series A, Series B fundraise like you guys did. But it obviously worked. I mean, you guys raised $20 million, as you mentioned, as a growth round with Santana Growth Partners. So congratulations on that. Can you tell us a bit about that strategy of going down the growth equity path and why you decided to go with Santana?
Prior to raising capital, we spent 2 months really working on our story, working on our deck, putting the data room together. And during that time, I worked very closely with my team to really try to figure out who are the right partners for us, because at the end of the day, you're going to talk to a lot of investors out there, but what you want to do is that you want to come out with a handful of investors that believe in you and your vision and your company and what you're trying to do. So as part of this round, I've said this many times to our employees and other people, I pitched 90 investors for our Series B. So and some people think, oh, you just go out there and talk to 2 people and then you get a term sheet. And yes, there are entrepreneurs who've done that. I'm sure, the guys at FTX had that experience where anybody they talked to gave them a check. We didn't have that experience. I had to pitch 90 investors, but really we had a very clear idea of what we wanted. We wanted to make sure that the investor that we wanted to work with was entrepreneur friendly. It's really important to find somebody who understands what you're going through, because so many investors, they're just on the hunt for the next deal. and they don't really care about you, right? Like, and I'm sorry to say this, most VCs don't care about you as an entrepreneur. And that's a big mistake that I made, thinking that once they invest, they're going to want me to succeed and they're going to help me. But the truth is, it's not, right? Like, you have to think about how they make money. They make money on doing deals and big exits. They don't, the rest doesn't really matter. So for me, number one, it was really to make sure that we work with a fund that's not constantly chasing that next deal, that they really care about the entrepreneurs that they're working with. And since I had that in droves in all the interviews that I did with some of the portfolio companies that they've invested in. Second thing that was really important for us is that they understand the industry that we're in, because a lot of investors are just generalists. Really, they don't understand fintech. They ask you questions like, "What's the difference between you and PayPal?" Right? And it's like when you get these questions, like they have no idea like what is happening in the space. So you want an investor who really understands your business and believes in the sector that you're trying to compete. And then lastly, do they have the experience to get you to that next level? Because if you're in the venture capital, growth capital world, what you're basically trying to do is that you're trying to make sure that you're getting to NFL. You're trying to get to Major League, right? So what you want to do is that you want to surround yourself with people who've played in NFL, they've played in Major League. So for us, Santana had that again in droves, and for the partners there, Ben comes from FTV, which is a very large private equity fund. He's gone everything from taking companies public to multi-billion-dollar exits. They've worked with fintech companies, a bunch of vendors that we actually use at Plooto internally. They've invested in the past, and their track record really spoke for itself. So those are the key things for me: entrepreneur-friendly, understand the industry and the vertical that we compete with, and helping us get to that next level. And Santana had all of that. So that's why we decided to go with them.
That's fantastic. I mean, it sounds like a perfect marriage, and you got everything you were looking for out of it, and it sounds like they did as well. And it's a game of numbers, and it's a game of knowing what you're looking for. So, congrats on getting that done. Last question before we move into our fast favorite section is, given you're in the financial services company, you guys really believe in data. How is the current economic environment and the rising interest rates impacted your business and the SMBs that you're working with? And what data are you seeing out of all of them?
As capital becomes more expensive, it's going to be tougher and tougher for small businesses to compete. So it's going to become a lot harder for small businesses to hire. It becomes really tough for them to invest in innovation. It really becomes tough for them to expand. So then cash preservation becomes really, really important, which is something that not only you see with small businesses, but a lot of VC-backed companies, a lot of VCs are sending out memos to say that's what cash is. What we are seeing is that our customers are obviously experiencing the same thing, and it's going to become tougher and tougher for them to, if they have not built a solid business to compete. And I believe really it's going to be like this for the next 2 or 3 years, which is really unfortunate. On the positive side of that, Plooto was really built for this moment, because what we're trying to do and what our mission is as a company is to help small businesses accelerate. And the way that we want to help them accelerate their growth is by helping them manage their business better, manage their AP and their AR better. I am optimistic that we're going to come out of this better. We've already been through similar experience with COVID. Like the data is very similar for our customers as it was around COVID. What I would suggest to all small businesses is to really preserve as much cash as possible and really focus on their customers, because it's going to be tougher. Not everybody is lucky enough to be able to raise venture capital or growth equity fund. Most businesses don't. And hopefully that's where we can help more SMBs survive. Is using their own cash more intelligently.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, you're definitely a vital part of our tech stack. And also, I think that, given your background of having struggles in your own personal life and also struggles raising capital early on, you're going to make sure that new funding of venture capital dollars is going to go the distance so that your company is successful in the long run. So excited to see the journey play out over the next several years. Before we wrap things up, we always ask our guests for their fast favorites. So first off, your favorite podcast.
I mean, obviously, your podcast is now my number one choice. Other than that, but other than that, I love Knowledge Project. I think it's something that I listen to like religiously.
Next is your favorite newsletter or blog.
I read a lot of books, so I really don't have a favorite blog. I don't really read that many blogs.
Okay, we'll put the Plooto blog then up for that answer.
Obviously, Plooto blog, yes.
Your favorite tech gadget?
I'm a huge nerd when it comes to gadgets, so I try gadgets all the time. My newest favorite one is Amazon Scribe. So it's a Kindle, but you can write on it, which is amazing because I used to have an iPad for the purpose of writing because I write a lot as well. I hate writing on glass; it's like really weird. So Amazon Scribe has really changed. Their software is terrible, but hopefully they're working on it. But the experience has been pretty good.
What do you write? Just like taking notes and stuff like that in meetings or?
I literally, Pingo is a very written word culture. So in fact, like we don't even speak in the first like 20 minutes of our meetings. We're reading reports and we uninstall PowerPoint from everybody's computer. Like you're not allowed to use PowerPoint at Plooto. So we write down a lot of things. So I write everything, every thought I have, every idea I have, every reaction, like I write everything.
I love that. Taking a page out of the Jeff Bezos mantra. No PowerPoint presentations. All right. Next is your favorite new trend.
I'm a big foodie and I'm really big into espresso and coffee. So for me, all the new things and innovation that's happening in espresso extraction. Again, I'm a huge nerd gadget, so so everything that has to do with espresso extraction and all the new trends there.
Yeah, like TikTok coffee, watching the espresso pulls are just amazing, very satisfying. What's your go-to coffee brand or specialty coffee brand and machine do you have at home?
So my wife is going to kill me for answering this because I'm really hardcore into my espresso. So for those of you who know, I have your grind is actually more important than your espresso machine. So I have a grinder, which my wife does not like because it's 90 pounds and it's a massive grinder. Mazer Z is what I have. And then the coffee machine that I have is called Decent. It's literally Tesla of espresso machines because it pulls live data because it has over like 200 sensors in it. So it's continuously running like live data of all of your extraction, and then it just projects all the data for you. So it combines my love of espresso and data in the morning together. So
what's it called?
Decent espresso machine.
Oh my, I have to check that one out. That is unbelievable. I don't even want to ask the price of that thing.
I'm a very frugal person, but I feel like the things everything I buy, I spend like really like good amount of time thinking about whether this purchase is necessary or not. But I'm a firm believer of buying things, the few things that give you really joy in your life, and get the best that you can afford. Because especially gives me a lot of joy every morning. So that was well worth it.
I agree. I learned when I met my wife, I learned that you pay for what you get from her father when it comes to like high-end sporting equipment and gear and stuff like that. So you definitely want to make sure you got the right espresso machine, especially if you're doing a couple pulls a day. So thanks for sharing that one. Next is your favorite book, your favorite topic, it sounds like.
Yeah, so I'm a really big reader. So I'm really into like different topics that I really dig deep into certain topics. And right now I am reading Full Catastrophic Living, and it's a meditation book. It's one of like the very well known meditation books that I'm reading. But my favorite book of all time is Principles by Ray Dalio. That book changed my life.
Wow, that was your favorite book of all time.
Of all time, yeah.
Wow, that's a big statement there. And last but not least, your favorite life lesson.
You know what? I reflect every night, and I try to write down my reflections about the day and how it went. So I do have a whole notebook of life reflections. Two things that I've learned in life is nobody knows anything. You need to experience things for yourself. You need to ask as many questions and learn as much as possible from quote unquote experts. but you then need to live it and apply those lessons to your life, because the time you're living in, the circumstances that you're going into, nobody has experienced it other than you. So don't take people's advice because nobody knows anything. Listen, reflect on it, and make sure that you process it internally for yourself. And that's going to, help you along the way.
Yep, absolutely. Nothing better than firsthand experiences. This has been awesome. Thanks so much for joining us in the tank today with the co-founder and CEO of Plooto, Hamid Abbasi.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Tank Talks. To learn more about this episode, be sure to go to Apple Podcast or Spotify to find more detailed notes on this episode or to check out previous episodes. Also, if you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a review and a rating, as it helps us out a lot. And hit that subscribe button so you can get notified when new episodes come out. Finally, make sure to give me a follow on Twitter @MattyBCohen or @Tank Talk Podcast to stay up to date on new episodes or to be a guest on our show. Till next time,